and welcome to the St. Patrick's Festival and I.NY, where today we will tell the story of the late great Jimmy Neary, an immigrant from Sligo in the 1950s who became a New York City institution. He was the friend of presidents and governors, the confidant, literally, of giants in the form of the New York football giants, and a restaurateur extraordinaire. My name is Dave Hannigan, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Jimmy's daughter, Una. Welcome, Una.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very honored. As you mentioned, I'm Una Neary, the daughter of the famous Jimmy Neary, who I am so proud of. He had a tremendous legacy, really touched everybody that he ever encountered and had an opportunity to meet. And I'm just happy over the next, 45 minutes or so to share some of the wonderful stories of my dad's life and all the adventures he had. And he just recently passed away on October 1st. And it's a big loss to New York and to the world. But I'm looking forward to sharing those stories with you today.
And of course, Una, I should mention, Una is an incredibly accomplished person in her own right. She is the Chief Compliance Officer at BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager. She was formerly a partner at Goldman Sachs. And during her time with the Federal Reserve, she became the youngest bank examiner in American history. She is also, in some ways, the face of Neary's bar and certainly the keeper of the flame and the preserver of the legacy of her great father. I thank you, Una, because I know it's only been a few months. I know the wound is probably still a little bit raw, and thank you for being willing to talk to us about him so soon. And really, firstly, the keeper of the flame. Does that description capture what you do, or is that inaccurate?
I think that captures it very well. As you mentioned, with my dad just passing away, the wound is pretty wide open still, and will be for a very long time. He was such a tremendous force for good in so many ways. But one of the things that we always knew was I was going to carry on the legacy of Neary's. That was my objective for a very long time. I had the pleasure of working alongside my father for 42 years, part-time at the restaurant. So when people ask me, how does it feel now to be in the restaurant and running it? I said, Dad is still running it. I'm just the person on the ground day to day. So my father is still overseeing the whole operation. He's guiding me and instructing me how to do things. But so I'm the keeper of it, but he's still the man in charge.
I love that. He's the boss even still. Now,
always.
You mentioned that you've been going to the restaurant since you were a kid. How old were you when you realized that your father was special? He was a bit of a big deal, and that he was a little different. His job might have been a little bit different from other fathers.
So Dad worked all the time. He literally was gone out of the house all the time. So we didn't get to see him often. He had days off. When he first opened, he had a partner, Brian Mulligan. So he was off on Wednesdays and Sundays. And so I would see him on Sundays. But during the week, we never saw him because he was, always working the night shift. So I didn't really have a good understanding of how special he was, but I missed him. And so I started working at the restaurant when I was 12. And that's when it really was obvious to me on his connection with people. It was extraordinary. I mean, it didn't matter who the person was that walked in that front door. They wanted to see Jimmy Neary. They wanted to talk to Jimmy Neary and just have a minute with him. And so I would say it was around 12, 13 when I first noticed he was just different than anybody I had ever kind of come into, dealings with. But watching him engage with people and his staff and the way he treated, and up until his final days, treated the staff, they were all family. Everyone was special. Everyone had a special place, and relationship with him. So it was very early on I noticed it.
Because, you said about his way with people. What I noticed, in the outpouring of grief after his death, was obviously Neary's was synonymous with it. It was power brokers and politicians and writers and all sorts of famous people, but it was the outpouring from ordinary New Yorkers, people who were not famous, not bold-faced names, to use that whose lives he touched just by, as you said, making them feel they were special the minute they walked in the door of Neary's.
Absolutely. It didn't matter if you were the doorman whether you were running a major company, it didn't matter what your role was. I mean, everybody. When I tell you, after my dad passed away, I always knew what an impact he had on people's lives. But our delivery folks, the people that would meet him when they would deliver our supplies to Neary's, they told me how sad they were to see him gone. It was his smile lit up a room. It was the liquor distributors. It was the food distributors. It was the mail person that comes in. She adored my dad. She just always enjoyed having a quick conversation with him when she delivered the mail every day. To our customers, and they ranged the gamut. And people walking up and down 57th Street, where our restaurant is located in New York City. People love to see Jimmy Neary walking down the street. He always had his suit on, his tie, and this beaming, massive smile. Everybody, you just couldn't help but be attracted to this person coming down the street. And he would say hi to everybody, absolutely everybody. He, about a year and a half ago, moved into the apartment beside me on the west side, Upper West Side, where I live. Everyone in the building fell in love with him. Everyone, all our doormen, our our neighbors. He just instantly connects with people. And everyone was saddened with the news. And as a tribute to my father, and it's a real testament, after my dad passed away, we posted a notice outside, and it was in the papers and it was on television. People left flowers, rosary beads. Someone gave a foam finger, a number 1 foam finger representing my dad, and covered the door with it to show their respect and privilege of knowing him. And that's the kind of person he was.
Well, it's funny you mentioned his smile, because preparing for this, I was looking at a lot of interviews with your dad on YouTube, and in every single one, he's beaming just to be talking to people. But my question to you would be, and he had this wonderful roguish kind of glint in his eye smile, but was he ever, did the smile ever go away? Was he, behind the scenes, was he capable of not smiling and being a terror, or was that just his default setting?
It was his default setting. I will tell you, the only time that I can say I saw my father not with a smile on his face and not beaming and the little twinkle in his eye that he always had was when my mother passed away in January of 2007. That was obviously, she had battled cancer for a couple of years, and unfortunately the cancer kind of took over and took her. That was the only sad time in my dad's life, a truly sad time, a period of sadness where there was not that smile. He just had the most positive outlook on life. Every day he'd say, I love my life. It didn't matter what happened that day. It didn't matter if it was exciting or not. It was a great day. And that's how he viewed every moment of his life. And it just was through his pores. So he was never angry. He never raised his temper. He just always had a smile on his face, always.
You said he loved his life. He lived an extraordinary life. Obviously the reason we're talking about him today is because he is one of the great. There are Irishmen who come to America and Irish women who come to America who they create these epic lives for themselves. And your father was a classic of that genre. Can you give me a brief account of his early life and your life in Tubbercurry, County Sligo, before he came here, or what you knew of it?
Sure. So my dad only went to sixth grade in school in Tubbercurry, and was raised on a farm in Tubbercurry. He knew from a very young age Dad had no interest in farming. It just wasn't his thing. So he wanted to work in the city, meaning the town of Tubbercurry, where the shops were. He wanted to be with people. While he appreciated the importance of farming, he was not someone that was going to get up at the crack of dawn and go out and take care and tend to the cows and things like that. So as soon as he could, he wanted to work in the town, in the shops in the town. And at a young age, he got a job at the drapery store. Eddie Gallagher had a drapery store. And he enjoyed it. He loved it. He loved working with people. He loved conversation. And then he was a hackney driver as well. He was doing cab driving at night. And he would drive people to the dances. And oftentimes he would drive folks to the dance and then get out of the car himself and go into the dances and enjoy himself. He loved to dance. That was his thing. But he knew from a young age that Ireland, great country. He loved everything about it. but there was something about America that always appealed to him. And when he finally had that opportunity to come to America and was sponsored here to come to America in 1954, he wanted to bring the best of his Irish tradition, his Irish culture, but to come to America and try and make it in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean the story of how he gets to America, how he funds the trip to America. As you said, he was sponsored, but he had to pay his boat fare. Can you tell us that story?
He did. So this is a story. There's a documentary of my father called Neary's The Dream at the End of the Rainbow that is on Amazon Prime that came out. And when we were filming the documentary, we did some of it in New York and we did some of it back home in Tubacury. That's actually for the first time, and this is probably now over 5 years ago, that I actually found out how he paid for his trip. And it's funny because I thought I've heard all the stories and I didn't. And so while we were interviewing local folks in Tubacury who were friends of my father, grew up with my father, one of the gentlemen, Jerry Berg, tells the story of this poker match that happened. It was the night after one of the dances, and a bunch of guys in Tubacury got together and they were playing a poker match. And as the story goes, there wasn't a lot of money that was being bet, but everyone kind of put their money on the table. Dad cleared the table off. He won all the take for the night, and he used the winnings from his poker match, which again, I didn't even know he knew what poker was, used that to buy 2 lamb. And that was his first investment, if you will. And he bought 2 lamb, and he, with one of the neighbors, let the lambs match up with the rams. And later, over the next couple of years, he had 14 lamb. And what he decided to do was sell them in the town square. On Wednesdays was fair day. And he brought the lambs into town and got a very good price for lamb and sold all of them and had made roughly $82, the equivalent of $82. And he was able to use that money to fund his trip to America. So it was from a poker match. And again, I was shocked when I heard that. I said, "Do you know how to play poker?" He's like, "Well, I did. I played back in the day." And I had no idea.
Even by the standards of Irish American immigrant stories, that's a classic. Gambling and then some very sensible agriculture mixed in as well to finance the whole trip. So he gets to America. It's the mid-50s,
Yes.
And he starts work at the New York Athletic Club, and then at PJ Moriarty's bar. There's this wonderful tradition in amongst the Irish in America of extending the hand down to the newly arrived. You've been here a while, you help somebody out. Was PJ Moriarty the man who put the hand down to help your father, get up and running in America?
Well, I would say it was actually one step before that. When he first came to America, he actually obviously didn't have a job. He went first to a job. They put him to go to a warehouse to meet with an Irish gentleman about a job at a warehouse. And my dad was not a particularly tall man. He was about 5'5". And he went to the warehouse. The boxes were bigger than my father. And the gentleman who was running the warehouse said, "Sir, I'm sorry, Jimmy, you're not going to be able to handle this job. It's not going to work out for you." So we went back and worked with a woman named Maureen Mulcahy, who then said, "Well, why don't you go to the New York Athletic Club? I am certain you'll get a job there." And he got a job as a towel boy. And interestingly enough, he was the tallest of all the workers at the pool at the New York Athletic Club. So he felt great. It was terrific. One of the members was PJ Moriarty. And so my father was working there. All the members fell in love with Dad, just his storytelling and his charm and his personality and the smile. And PJ was one of the members at the athletic club and really liked my father. But then my father got called to service. He got drafted into the Army. So he had to leave the New York Athletic Club and go into the Army, where he was a tank driver. Peacetime, he didn't serve in any wartime, thank goodness, but he was a tank driver in Germany for a while. When he came back to the athletic club, PJ obviously was still a member, and he said to the manager of the pool, "I want Jimmy to come and work for me." And he had these 2 very famous Irish restaurants. So when the manager of the pool told him, "Jimmy, PJ wants you to go work for him," Dad thought he was getting fired from the athletic club. He said, "Are you firing me?" And he said, No, you're going to still work for us during the day. You're going to work for PJ at night." And so PJ knew there was something special about Dad, and that bringing him into the restaurant business would be just a natural fit for him. So by bringing him in, he taught him. He learned the ropes from PJ. But it was Dad on his own initiative knew after several years of working for PJ, he wanted to do his own. He wanted to go out on his own. PJ was fully supportive of it, but Dad had learned from PJ, learned the ins and outs of how to run a restaurant. And he was like, it's my time. And PJ supported him on that. But he was very sad to lose him because, Dad was a special, part of his staff. But he obviously wished him well, and off Dad went in St. Patrick's Day of 1967 and opened up Neary's.
Before I get to the opening of Neary's and everything, I just want to go back to the army stuff, because I don't think people appreciate in Ireland how many of your father's generation who came to America in the 50s and 60s, how many of them served in the military. I think the draft may have still been operating at that point. What did that mean to him?
Absolutely.
That stint in the U.S. Army.
He was so proud. He loved America. I mean, he was very excited to come to this country. But he knew when he accepted and was sponsored over here, he knew there was a chance that he could get drafted. I don't think he thought for 1 minute he actually would, but he knew there was a possibility. And like he said, he wasn't here that long, and all of a sudden he got a letter from, as he said, Uncle Sam saying, congratulations, you're joining the U.S. Army. You know what? He took it in stride. He trained in Fort Hood, Texas, met a lot of terrific servicemen that he became lifelong friends with. And then when he went to Germany, again, it was peacetime, so he didn't experience any war. But he was very, very proud of his service to the U.S. Army. And any military, we're very strong supporters of the military. And any military personnel or someone who served in the military that would come into the restaurant, Dad would salute them, and Dad would rattle off his number. He was very proud of his time and his number, and it was a tradition. And oftentimes for special holidays or special commemorative days for our military, you would find Dad leading us in song, singing "God Bless America" in honor of our servicemen and women. So it meant the world to him.
That as I said, it's a part of the Irish immigrant story that I don't think gets told enough. How many of them served even in peacetime. Yeah. Now, to go back to Neary's.
Maybe I'll tell you one story on kind of the military point. So General Michael Corcoran, who was from Sligo, he was a Sligo man, and he led the fighting 69th Regiment in wartime. And Mayor Bloomberg, and we'll get on to Neary's in a minute, but Mayor Bloomberg was active mayor of New York at the time and was invited back to Sligo to do a dedication monument to General Michael Corcoran because of his service. But he was a Sligo man and invited my father to come over on that trip, and we can talk about that more later. But that's just showing how much the U.S. greatly appreciated, and this is just one example of how the Irish that came to this country and fought to support freedom and all that through an American assignment in the military. The U.S. military was and continues to be obviously richly blessed with Irish descendants as part of it. So, and Dad was one of them.
Going back to Neary's, what it opens in 1967, famously, as I read in the stories of your dad, terrible rain on opening day. Not a good portent for the prosperous future. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So yes, opening day, and obviously Dad and his partner at the time, Brian Mulligan, knew they were going to open on St. Patrick's Day. That was there was no question about it. The symbolism of the Irish connection in America was absolutely forefront in both their minds. But it was a tough start. And early days, it was quiet. I mean, Dad and Brian, it wasn't that there were a lot of staff. Dad and Brian were not only the owners and running it, they were also the bartenders. They were doing a lot of the work. Neither of them were cooking, which was a good thing because they were not good in the kitchen, but they were good in all other aspects of the job. And literally, slowly, Neary's got more people locally got to know Neary's, started to come in. And probably the first politician of significance that came in was, at the time he was a congressman, was Hugh Carey, who later became the governor of New York. And he was made aware of this gentleman named Jimmy Neary opened this place called Neary's. You should go check it out, Congressman Hugh Carey, who was obviously a big supporter of the Irish, coming from a long line of Irish descent. And he came in and he adored Neary's, adored my father, and gave him a picture and said to my father, put this up on the wall. And it was when he was congressman. And he said, and this is a sign that, hopefully this will bring you great success in drawing customers in, knowing that a congressman and the Irish connection, that this will bring you lots of good fortune going forward. And that was the first picture up on the wall. And there's a picture of Governor Carey on the wall ever since that day. And now we're going to celebrate our 55th anniversary this St. Patrick's Day. But then just over the upcoming years, the customers became more regular and it got more notoriety, and it was getting mentioned in papers and sometimes on television. And it just kind of continued to grow from there.
And can you explain the dress code, please? The dress code,
yes.
was that there from the start?
Changed. Yes, so it's changed a little bit, but not significantly. So from day one, and any picture you probably see of my father ever, he's always a suit and tie, and he has cufflinks, and he has his lapel with his special pins on it, and that's my father's dress code. It was every single day of his life. That's how my father dressed. It was a rare exception. You would see him in a sweater, and you would never see him at Neary's with one on. So the dress code was jacket and tie for the men, and women proper dress as well. And that continued with the jacket and tie for many, many years. When I started down in Wall Street in 1990, in the early 90s, I said to Dad, it's business casual in the world now. I don't care one iota of what it is. We're staying proper dress. So it was late in the 90s where he loosened up on the tie. A couple years later, he said, no, jacket is okay, but collared shirts are a must. You can't wear shorts. You can't wear, he does not like jeans. No t-shirts, no caps. You still have to look, properly dressed when you come into Neary's. So there is a sign on the inside door that says proper attire required. And he just felt like when you're going to Neary's, he didn't want it to be like a pub. He wanted it to be a, fine dining experience. And part of that is getting dressed coming to Neary's. So there have been many times, and some of the funnier stories that people will talk about Neary's is when they've gotten kicked out because they were in shorts or not dressed properly. Or, they'll tell the story that, Jimmy Neary made me put on chef pants and a chef's jacket so I could stay in the dining room. So there are many stories out there about him doing that. And he's kicked out my own family where they thought they could get away with it. And he's like, nope, not even the family. Get out. You're not dressed properly. So he held very strong to proper dress when you're going to Neary's.
Did that rule mark it out from other establishments in the area, or would that have been standard at that time?
Early days, it would have been more standard. Dad was certainly and continues to be one of the few restaurants that really holds to more of a proper dress code. But that eased over the years in most restaurants for sure. I mean, you go to theaters now or Broadway shows, and it's amazing how very casually dressed people are. Dad had never let it get that casual, never.
In Neary's, I think he used to tell the story of the night the astronaut came in, and that made him realize how big the place was getting, or how famous the place was getting. What was that story exactly?
Sure. So that was astronaut John Glenn. So it was in the, I think, early 70s when that happened. And John Glenn had orbited the Earth. And everybody knew who astronaut John Glenn was. And Dad came into work. He was doing his night shift, came in, and he could hear some of the customers. The dining room was quite busy, and he could hear some of the customers softly saying, Jimmy doesn't know who's in the dining room. Jimmy doesn't know who that is. So Dad kind of walked up one of the aisles in the restaurant, went into the kitchen, and he was peeking through the glass window to kind of suss out who was in the dining room. Then he spotted astronaut John Glenn. And then Dad came out of the kitchen. He went over to him and he said, it is an absolute honor to have you, astronaut John Glenn, in Neary's. What an honor for one of the astronauts who orbited the Earth. If my doors never open again, after you coming here, I know I've made it in America. And that was one of the most, and Dad's had tremendous people come in that front door. That was one of the most special moments in my father's 50 plus years of opening Neary's, is having astronaut John Glenn in Neary's. And it's interesting. So that was an amazing encounter for my father, and there are stories written about that. When my father sold his house in September of 2020 out in New Jersey, we were packing up things. I was helping him pack up things. We found a picture that we actually forgot that we had, an autographed picture when astronaut John Glenn had become Senator John Glenn. Some customer got a picture autographed to my father, "Dear Jimmy, best regards, John Glenn, Senator Glenn." And so we had it reframed, and it's up in the restaurant. So when we reopened after the pandemic, we were closed for 14 months. And we rarely change pictures on Neary's walls. It's a big deal to have a picture added or changed. And that now is on the wall of Neary's. We found it, and Dad said, "That's going up." And so we have it up in the wall now.
Was that the moment that he realized that it had become kind of a place where people would, it was a place you had to go to when you were in New York, even if you weren't from New York?
Absolutely. That was a very defining moment for Neary's in a very positive way. Absolutely.
So the list of people who frequented Neary's is long, and far too long and illustrious for me to go into here. But it's presidents, governors, all sorts of politicians, athletes, authors, actors, playwrights, etc. Was there ever a moment, you think, where your father was awestruck, or was there one person among all those that your father was a little taken aback by?
I would say the one person, because it was me. I think I was more awestruck than he was. He just rolled with the punches. He was extraordinary in how he handled it. I think the person that, if I was to pick one, it would be when President Clinton came in. So Mayor Bloomberg came in every New Year's Eve when he was mayor, and it was for 13 years. So after he dropped the ball in Times Square, a fleet of SUVs would pull up in front of Neary's, and Mayor Bloomberg and his team would come in after the ball dropped and have some Irish coffees and snacks and, celebrate the new year. And there was one year when President Clinton, now he was former President Clinton at the time, and Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, acting secretary, and they dropped the ball in Times Square. And I remember having this conversation with my father that day. He said, "I bet you the mayor is going to bring them in." And Dad was the optimist, always an optimist, and I was more the realist. And I'm like, "Dad, there's no way Mayor Bloomberg is bringing in President Clinton and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton." He's like, "I think he will. I think he will." Sure enough, at 12:25, there's a fleet of SUVs outside. Dad had locked the front door because he wanted to make sure to keep only, nice people inside. And there's the mayor knocking on the door, asking my father to unlock the door to let him in. And the mayor came in, and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton came in. But then when the president came in, he pretty much took over the room. There was such a dynamic charisma to him. I'd say that was the one that Dad was probably most awestruck by. And he was amazing. He talked to everybody. He took pictures. They were there for a couple hours. But I would say that was probably the one that made the biggest mark on my father from a kind of an awe moment.
And your father and Mayor Bloomberg, that seems to be, that was not a customer relationship. That was a friendship. How did that come about? How did they become so close?
So it's interesting. So where my father's located, the restaurant, it's on 57th and 1st, and right down the block is Sutton Place, a really beautiful, exclusive area in New York City. And Mayor Bloomberg, long before he was mayor, when he was just Mike Bloomberg and running a company called Bloomberg, he lived down the block. And so he was a frequent customer way back in the beginning. So he's been coming in for over 40 years. So they started their friendship long before, he was mayor and all of that. And just over the years, the friendship just grew. And when he became mayor, he really did some extraordinary special things for my father, and we can certainly talk about those. But that friendship was just long lasting, and he would always check on my dad. He would always make sure that he was okay. There was just it was a family relationship that really grew. And actually, he was one of the three that did the eulogy for my father when we had my dad's funeral mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I called him and I asked him, and I said, "Mike, would you mind?" And I barely got the words out, and he said, "It would be my honor to give your father his eulogy." and he was just incredible. And the friendship, you could hear it pour through his words at the funeral mass. And it's really funny because Mike Bloomberg is one of the funniest men you ever met. He has this dry wit, dry sense of humor, and people see him as a businessman, as a politician, and they don't see this other side of him. And oh my goodness, watching Dad and Mayor Bloomberg go after each other and tease each other, he would say, I have no idea why I come in here, Jimmy. You water the drinks down, your prices are too much, the service isn't good, there's 30,000 restaurants in New York, and I just keep coming back to the same place every time. Why do I do it? Why do I do it, Jimmy? And Dad would just burst out laughing every time he would say it. So their friendship, was extraordinary. And very fortunately, Mike and his partner, Diana Taylor, were in 2 nights before my dad passed away. So they actually had a chance to see him very recently, right before his passing. And that was very special that they had that time together.
I've seen Mike Bloomberg talk about your father, and there is genuine warmth and affection in everything he says. And the story that he tells about bringing your dad back to Sligo for the Fighting 69th unveiling. Well, firstly, he said that your father, obviously they're flying private jet to Ireland, but your father was reluctant to leave the shop for a couple of days, to leave work. Would that have been your father's way, that I don't want to leave my post?
Oh, to get Dad to take a night off, never mind a 2-day trip, is a big deal. Dad, his life was Neary's. He enjoyed every minute of it. But if there was something that could pull him away, it was Mayor Bloomberg bringing him on his private jet over for the unveiling. But there was a conversation. It wasn't an automatic yes, but it was a magical trip, and it was interesting. There was a car that picked Dad up, brought him to the Marine terminal in LaGuardia Airport to board on the mayor's jet. And there were a number of people on the plane. And he leaned over and said to my father, do you snore? I'm going to be sleeping on this flight. And Dad said, well, I might. And so the mayor said, well, let me sleep first. Let me get to sleep first. So the two of them slept away on the flight. They landed. And when they landed in Shannon Airport. And they were greeted by representatives from the airport there, and they were given bottles of Irish whiskey and other things. And Mayor Bloomberg said to my father, this is one way to welcome somebody early morning to Ireland, with whiskey. Dad said, it's the only way, the Irish way. And they went to the unveiling of the monument, and it was fantastic. And it was, again, a tribute to General Michael Corcoran from Sligo. And after the unveiling, Dad understood that they were just going to turn around, go right back to the airport and go back home. And the mayor said to my father, I have one more stop I'd like to make before we go to the airport. Dad said, whatever you want to do, I'm here on, with you. And the fleet of cars came into the town of Tubacurry, to my dad's village, and pulled up. And Dad couldn't believe it. It was the dream of a lifetime, Dad, to be in Tubacurry with the mayor of New York City, being able to, say he's here with them. And the fleet of SUVs pull up, and out comes, for everyone locally, Seamus Neary out of one side of the car, Mayor Bloomberg out of the other. And people came running out to see my father more so than the mayor, because Dad knew all the people in the town. So it was just such an exciting moment. And it was a great story. So the mayor and my father walked through the village, the little town square. And the mayor said to him, Jimmy, will you tell your grandchildren one day that you came to Tubacurry with the mayor of New York? And he said, I will not. And he said, you won't. He said, nope. I'm going to tell him I'm coming with the future president of the United States of America is what I'm going to tell him. And obviously, we know how that unfortunately played out, because he did run for mayor, or for president rather. But Dad knew this was just a special moment for everyone in Tubacurry too. It was a big tribute to them too, and it was a great moment, absolutely great moment.
That is an incredible picture you paint of the homecoming and the fleet of cars into Tubacurry. I know that Mike Bloomberg came out with a great quote about your dad, about the diplomacies. Like he said, when he saw your dad operating in Ireland, he saw what true diplomacy and people skills were up close. And my question to that would be, like, was this, you observed him up close for 42 years, as you said, at work. Was that his gift? Like, or what was his gift? Or if you were asked to define it?
Absolutely. I mean, his leadership and diplomacy skills were the best I've ever observed, and it was just natural to him. So everyone could share their views. Everyone could have different views. You could have Republican views. You could have Democratic views. You could have a different set of views altogether, and all views were welcomed. Everyone could share them, and you had to respect one another for differing views. And you come to Neary's and you knew that that was okay, and it's still okay. It doesn't matter what your views are. You respect one another. And Dad always did that ever since day one. And then just being a good person. I mean, he just was a really good person, and his leadership skills with his staff. They all adored my father. I mean, I just was over at the restaurant yesterday, and our chef Gus was, "I miss your father so much." I mean, that was the first words out of his mouth, because he just was such a strong, caring, empathetic leader. We have staff members at Neary's, and the mayor knows this well. Michael Bloomberg knows this well. We have one staff member. Her name is Liz Farley. This was Brian Farley, Dad's, founding partner of Neary's. His sister Liz still works with us. She'll be there 55 years in June of this year. So in June 67, she started. She still works with us 2 days a week. We have another person, Mary O'Connor, and Liz and Brian were from Cavan. Mary O'Connor is from Cork, Youghal County, Cork. Mary started almost 45 years ago. She was a waitress. After my dad passed away, I promoted her to manager to kind of help me run the restaurant. But she's going on 45 years. And we had staff who retired over the last, 3 to 5 years. One was there 40 years. One was there 38 years. One was there, I think, 39 years. And that's our wait staff. In our kitchen, we have some staff members that are there over 30 years. And that's all a tribute to my father, his leadership, his ability to care for people, care for his staff, give back. And to be that strong of a leader and a manager and have such loyalty, fierce loyalty from your staff is very hard to come by. And it was just a special gift. And the staff, we have a large number of our staff that are from Ireland, and we have a large number of our staff that are from Mexico. So Dad wanted to give everybody an opportunity. And he wanted to support the Irish coming to America and help them, raise their families and give their kids that were born in America a chance. So many of our staff, their kids have gone to college. So my dad only went to 6th grade. My mother only went to high school. And their one goal in life was to make sure that their 4 children had a college education. That was their number one goal, is to be able to give their kids what they couldn't have, which is a college education. And the staff that have joined us have been able to enjoy that same luxury of being able to afford to pay their kids college tuitions. So it's kind of carrying on that wonderful, tribute of coming to America and being able to make a life better for yourself and for your family.
I think when you outline the work practices that lead to loyalty like that, I mean, that there's no secret then to the success. I mean, that is the success, or that is why the place does so well. You mentioned your mother. Can you tell me how your parents met?
So they met here. They met in New York. My father was a bartender at PJ Moriarty's, and my mother, and she was living with some girlfriends and a cousin, and they would occasionally go into PJ's. And my mother immediately was attracted to my father. She just had a crush on him from the minute she saw him. So after a couple of visits in there, one of the roommates, which is one of our cousins, said to my father, Jimmy, do you realize why we come in here all the time? Eileen Toomey is obviously attracted to you. And my father was oblivious, had no clue. He's like, what? Isn't she dating a friend of ours at Kevin Higgins? And she said she is. No interest. She wants to go out with you. So he said, sure, I'll ask her out. So my father, again, completely oblivious to that my mom was attracted to him. So we asked her out on a date, and it's a funny story. So he asked her out on a date. They agreed, the night he picked her up, they said, okay, we'll go to a movie. And whichever movie theater we see first, whatever movie's playing, we'll go to. And so that was fine. They were driving down one of the avenues, and there was a theater, and it was a John Wayne movie. And they park the car, they go in, and off they go. And my mother was not a particular fan of John Wayne movies. So during the course of the movie, she fell asleep. And so Dad let her sleep through the rest of the movie. The movie ends. He wakes her up and he said, "Come on, Eileen, I'll take you home now." And he said, "It was a great date. Good luck." And that was the end of it. And my mother was devastated. Now, I would also fall asleep in a John Wayne movie, and have many a time. And so my mother was so upset by the whole thing. And PJ Moriarty was actually the secret to getting them back together. So he arranged for a dinner one night with his wife, PJ, and his wife, Trudy Moriarty, with my father, and said, "Come on, let's go, Jimmy, out to this restaurant." So they there, and there's a seat for a fourth person. And he had invited my mother and got them back together, and the rest is history. They got married in 1966. They were married for 40 years before my mom passed away. And I have an older brother, Patrick, and two younger sisters, Anne Marie and Eileen. So while John Wayne put my mother to sleep on that first date, it ended out okay.
I love the detail of your father after your mother's death visiting the grave every morning. On his way to work, he would stop at the graveyard to say a prayer and have a chat with your mother, on his way. And then his other ritual, I think, was going to church every day. He was a man of, I mentioned he got a statesman's funeral in St. Patrick's Cathedral. He was a man of great faith. How important was his faith to him?
Oh, it was everything. For both my parents, it was the foundation of their entire life. Believing in God, our Catholic faith was critical to them. So we all went to Catholic school as well. My parents wanted us to all get a Catholic education to kind of continue that tradition. But you're absolutely right. Both my parents went to daily mass until my mom passed away. And my father actually was a lecturer in the SMA Fathers in Tenafly, New Jersey, where he went to mass every day. So Dad did the readings as well every day at church. And after my mom passed away, it was absolutely an expectation requirement that she be buried in a Catholic cemetery as well. And as you mentioned, Dad would get up every morning from his house in New Jersey, get dressed, showered, shaved, on his way to 9:30 mass. Before he went to mass, the cemetery is close by. He would stop, he would get out of the car, and he would say a prayer to Mom every single morning without fail. Didn't matter what the weather was like, he would go. And then he'd get back in the car and go off to mass and read at mass, and then head into Neary, have breakfast, and then head into Neary's every single day. And he did that until he moved into the city next to me in March of 2020. But up until that point, he literally visited the grave every day since my mother passed away in January of 2007. He adored my mother. They had an amazing relationship. And over the years, people were like, "Would your father like to start dating somebody?" I said, "You can ask him, but there's not a chance." And he married the woman he loved more than anything in this world, and he had no interest. His two loves were my mom and the restaurant. And while my mom was in heaven above him watching him, he still had the restaurant. So it was all about my mom.
Again, to that's beautiful to hear. To illustrate like your father's impact, he got Superbowl rings from the New York Giants, who were regular customers at the time in the 90s when they were winning Super Bowls. He was invited to the White House by, I think, older President Bush, and he went to the Vatican. And if I'm correct, I think you went with him to the Vatican. How did that come about?
I did. We were in. Oh my goodness. So one of my father's dearest friends for over 40 years, he is a cardinal now, Cardinal Edwin O'Brien, who's stationed in the Vatican. And he was a military chaplain for many, many years. And he was overseeing the Holy Sepulchre. And he was responsible for the Holy Sepulchre. And he had been coming into Neary's over 40 years. And he was an archbishop. And he was the Archbishop of Baltimore, and he was being elevated to cardinal. And it was the same year as Archbishop Dolan, who was the Archbishop of New York. He had moved to New York, was being elevated to cardinal as well, Cardinal of New York. And we were invited by Cardinal O'Brien to join his group for his elevation. And that just speaks volumes to the friendship of my father and the cardinal. And so Dad and I flew over, and it was the most incredible experience of our lives. And just to watch all of it, my father had the very, wonderful pleasure of knowing many cardinals. So while we were in the Vatican, it was quite quite humorous, and it made me laugh, but it also just showed the impact Dad had. Several cardinals, before the ceremony started, several cardinals walked over to my father to say hello. And people in the section that we were sitting with literally looked at me and said, "Who is this guy?" Because the cardinals were coming to this man, and they were like, Jimmy, so good to see you. So we had Dolan, O'Brien, Cardinal Cook, and a few others that had been friends of my father's and customers of Neary's for all the years. And it was quite a scene to see these cardinals coming over to my father to say hello. So it was an extraordinary experience, absolutely extraordinary. And a funny story about Cardinal O'Brien. So he's permanently residing at the Vatican, on the Vatican grounds. And he invited my father, my boyfriend, and I to come over several years ago after he was cardinal, to come just spend a couple days with him and visit and let him kind of show us the Vatican through his eyes, which was fantastic. But whenever Cardinal O'Brien came to New York, his first stop was to Neary's to come see Jimmy Neary. And he would come and have lunch and talk to my father. First stop always, and then go off and do whatever his business was. So he wanted us to come visit him in Rome. One thing he always did when he left Neary's was would take placemats and napkins with Neary's on it and bring it home with him back to the Vatican. And so we accepted the offer. We thought it was fantastic. And he said, "I want to bring you to my favorite restaurant in Rome. I want you to see my other favorite place." So we got the address, we, landed, checked our bags in at the hotel, and got in a cab and went straight to this restaurant to meet the Cardinal. And we walk in, and the owner, beautiful Italian man's like, "Oh, so nice to meet you." And he said, "Mr. Neary, I've heard so many wonderful things about you. Please come with me. The Cardinal is in the back waiting." We go to the table, and on the table set up are Neary's placemats and Neary's napkins. He had brought them and set them up in this restaurant in Italy. We fell over laughing. We have such great pictures from that trip. But literally the Cardinal said, "I take you everywhere I go, Jimmy. Everywhere I go, I take you with me." And that's the kind of friendships and relationships Dad had with so many people.
That's fantastic. We're kind of running out of time, Una. Just before we wrap it up, I think your father, by my reckoning, is the only person who had obituaries on NBC's Today Show, the Sligo Champion newspaper, the New York Times. What an incredible tribute to him that he featured in so many different corners of the world. But you're up close with him for so long. What was the one life lesson you picked up from watching your father work that you have applied to your own life?
His famous line was, "I love my life." And I mentioned this before. It didn't matter what he was doing every single day. He made it the most exciting, happy day of his life. And if there's anything that I personally took away from kind of everything I've observed and learned from my father is, love your life. Like, make the most of it. Stop wanting for more. Don't feel like you need more to be happy. Be happy with what you've got. If you have your health, you have friends, you have family, enjoy it. And he just did. He enjoyed every second of his life. And even during the pandemic, and we were closed for 14 months, if there was any person that had a right to be depressed and get sad and down about things, where his whole world stopped on a dime, not for 1 second did he get down. He just immediately said, "Okay, now what can we do? Well, now we can start freshening up the restaurant. It's going to be closed for a while. Let's get to it." And he was a man of just positivity. He always looked forward, never looked back. And I think those are tremendous lessons from a man late in his life. And when we closed, he was 89. Changing his whole life structure was massive. And not for 1 second did he get down about it. He's like, "Let's just go forward. Let's figure out what we can do," and just stayed positive. And I think that showed in his health, in his whole demeanor, and that smile, the sparkle in his eye. It just was always there. And he was just the happiest of men.
Una, it has been an absolute pleasure to listen to you talk about him and to do him justice in the stories and the pictures that you painted. On behalf of the St. Patrick's Festival and I.NY, I would like to thank you for joining us today and sharing this incredible story of an Irishman in America and a particularly epic life. Thank you so much.
Well, I am deeply honored. Thank you very much. My dad was truly an extraordinary man. And it's just telling you the Irish-American connection is so strong and so important. And so I just thank you for the time to share some stories about my dad. Thank you. And happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody.